Christian Seelos knows this, not only because he is the Director of Global Innovation for Impact Lab at Stanford University, but also because he and his colleague Johanna Mayer have studied scaling and innovation for 15 years, not from behind a desk, but in the real world. This book is chock full of eye-opening knowledge, but why take my words for it when you can hear it from Christian Seelos himself? Christian, it's an honor and a pleasure to welcome you on stage here in Copenhagen.
Thank you, thank you. Oh, cool, thanks. Wow, I should read the book. It sounds really interesting. Thanks so much, Carsten, for having me. And thanks for engaging with my research, building on it, trying to make it useful for the context here in Denmark. It's one of the biggest compliments and rewards that a humble researcher like myself can get. If anyone finds your research useful or interesting, thanks for that. Thanks to all of you for joining us and helping us figure out how can we make this fussy concept of innovation, which is full of hope and potential, how can we make this useful and operative for tackling some of the important social problems that you care about. My name is Christian Seelos, and I'm just gonna, I don't do lectures anymore, so I don't know what I'm gonna say. I need this type of challenge. I was kind of putting together some slides yesterday, but I, for example, don't know what the next slide will be. So I will use this as a guide. And I will throw some things of you that I think some of it you may find useful, right? Hopefully. And because there isn't enough time to go into sufficient depth in all of those frameworks that I'm gonna present to you, I want to whet your appetite. If you find anything interesting at all in the next half hour or so, it's all published. That's the good news. If there's anything that interests you, send me an email or send Carsten an email. There's a paper that we can share that discusses these things in more detail. And also remember, there's life after the event today. You know, Carsten is here to stay. He's going to build up a real competence base around social innovation here. I'm not too far away either. So let's this not be the end of it all, but really the beginning of something great. What's the next slide? There is no slides. Oh, this one. Okay, all right. So some of my biases. There's a lot of, innovation has a very positive ring to it. It's very often, if you listen to presentations in the philanthropic and development sectors, but also in the political sector now, innovation is great and more innovation is better. It has almost become an ideology. So I just want to share some of my concerns as a researcher about that, because what I try to do as a researcher, and I was trained in the natural sciences, I believe in causality. Things happen in the real world, whether we like them or not, whether we think they happen or whether we don't think to happen, and whatever we call them, there is things that happen in the real world independent of the names or concepts that we use to describe them, and we need to understand this causality. And there is also causality in innovation, and that causality means that innovation cannot be only good, because everything that human beings do has good and bad elements, and we need to reflect on both. So I just want to start us up with a little bit of a reflection on why we need to be careful with innovation. It's a delicate instrument. We need to it's a steep learning curve. I'm on this learning curve. We are all on this learning curve together, trying to integrate the term innovation into our decisions and actions and translate innovation into impact. Famous words by my Stanford colleague, the late Professor Jim March, after studying organizations and their innovation efforts for many, many decades. And he coined this famous term that is cited very often, that most new ideas are bad ideas. And that we are wasting a lot of resources on failed innovations that create very little value or impact for anyone. So innovation cannot be only good. It's okay if we have an abundance of resources of all kinds, like maybe you have in Denmark. It's not okay if you do social innovation in Bangladesh or in rural India, where I do most of my research, because there is no abundance of resources. Resources have a real opportunity cost. We got to be really careful whether we can just allocate more and more resources to innovations or whether we need to allocate them to maybe safer and smaller things sometimes. So understanding this balancing act is one of the things that interest me. The magic wand. Maybe I need to point it in this direction, right? Not to the slides. Yeah, see. Gosh. No, the second concern is that innovation, even innovation that works, has often side effects. We need a lot of innovation in today's world to fix the side effects of successful past innovations. Whether this is technology that is polluting outer space now is getting a real concern for space travel. Whether this is the wonderful innovation of fossil fuels, which now requires a lot of new green innovation to fix the problem of fossil fuels and carbon emissions and climate change. Antibiotics was a wonderful health innovation with real social impact. Now we need a lot of innovation to deal with the with the antibiotic resistance in bacteria. So innovation, we got to be careful about innovation because if we glorify it, we are stuck like hamsters in a wheel, driving faster cycles of innovation and faster cycles to fix the side effects of even successful innovations. You got to be a little bit careful about that. We see this in the social sector as well. Think about microfinance. Works in some contexts, but in other contexts it might work, but it might also throw whole families into levels of debt or alcoholism, prostitution, and all kinds of side effects of microfinance, which otherwise is interesting social innovation. So we got to have a critical eye on innovation, not glorify it as this ideology of innovation is good, but say, innovation, show me the evidence, show me the data, what's really going on here. Is there a safer alternative to innovation? It's not the only route to impact. It's one route to impact. There are much more safer ways towards impact and innovation. And finally, no. Okay. And the final question at a very high level, what is innovation? We are using this term without really having a consensus what it means. So this is an old article from Wall Street Journal. Businesses throw around the term to show they're on the cutting edge, like this, the innovative running shoe. This is the 7th iteration of the same model of running shoes. I mean, where's the innovation here, right? But it has, you almost cannot sell anything anymore without using the term innovative. Everything needs to be innovative. And unfortunately, this has swept over to the philanthropic and development communities. If you don't have the term innovation 5 times in your grant proposal, foundations may not fund you because they only fund innovative things, of course. So we got to be clear about how can we make the term innovation operational so that we can base decisions on the term and not just use it to kind of express, to shape some perception or portray ourselves as being modern and innovative and frontier. But make tough decisions about who to hire, where to allocate resources, and what the route to scaling and impact is. And this is, again, there is only reality out there. The rest is our own social constructions. We've got to be careful because we have some control over them. Reality has little patience for our fantasies and our terms. So we got to be careful about that. Here's an example. I feel like Harry Potter pre-college. Being more explicit here about how it all works.
Do you want me to?
All right, so the old-fashioned way. Here's an example. One of the most innovative social enterprises in the world working in rural India on the tough problem of inequality, gender inequality, caste inequality, and social status, economic inequality. Gram Vikas, they have won a number of awards for being the most innovative social enterprise working on inequality. But you know, if we look at their journey, and I just show you some displays from our research, how we map their journeys. When they started out in the 1970s as a student movement, who with a deep passion on doing something on inequality, but having no clue, first of all, what inequality really looks like in the real world, and what an effective intervention might be. They had lots of ideas which failed a lot. So whenever you see past discontinued, this is our code for something where they tried something and then failed. And this thing, you know, don't worry about the details. I just want to show you how often the past was discontinued and new ideas were being created. This was, and we can just go on and go on and go on. The next slide, and it goes back one slide. Until they eventually figured out a way of building trusted relationships with Indian villages, building goodwill, which took time, figuring out how does inequality look, and therefore how can we help a village to turn itself around the topic of inequality. Now they have something that really, really works well. In 3 years, they are turning around villages and dramatically lowering the inequality in them. Women are sitting on decision-making boards. Lower caste people are living door to door to higher caste people, and so on. But it took them many, many years to figure that out. And so what they should be awarded for is not innovation, but passion, commitment, not giving up, staying there, deeply caring about the social problem of inequality. Innovation did not create the breakthrough or the impact. What created the impact was that they just didn't give up and kept learning and kept trying and didn't just jump from one thing to the other to create some form of impact. No, they were very clear about what their identity is, doing something on inequality. But this is not something that we can easily recommend, and therefore when we award these organizations, we need to think again, you know, what are we doing with these awards? What kind of signals do we sell to foundations? So being a little bit critical, and therefore, if I can have the next slide, let's go into the nitty-gritty of the innovation process. You have seen also for the Gramvikas, you know, there's lots of ups and downs. Some things worked for half a year or a year, and then failures were showing up. And this is kind of where you have a hope that something works and then it doesn't work again. And we see this in the for-profit and the not-for-profit space. It's really, you know, I have an idea. That's usually how some innovation process starts. Sounds great if you get lucky. Most people probably say, no, now is not the right time. This doesn't work. We've never done this before, blah, blah, blah. And that kills your idea. But then maybe you can overcome this hurdle and you have a prototype. It works. The customer likes it. It's not proprietary. Costs are too high. Oops, no. We have a fix. It works. New costs look great. Oh no, we don't have enough resources. The boss hates the project. So innovation processes are this non-linear exploration of a number of different uncertainties. And I say this not as a definitional statement of what innovation is. This is really just empirical observations of what innovation processes look like. This is what's actually happening. For you don't know when you start out whether you fully understand the problem that you're addressing. You don't fully know which resources you need to access and whether you can access them and how to configure various resources into an effective intervention or solution. You don't even know whether or what exactly will come out of the end. So innovation is the way the way I propose to look at innovation and make it operationally useful is to say, don't expect success from innovation processes. Because if you expect success from something like that, you're doomed. You will be frustrated most of the time, and you will start the blame game of saying, you know, this was your idea, and you wanted that, and I always knew that it wouldn't work, and blah, blah, blah. That just creates a lot of frustration in organizations. What I've learned, one of the tricks I've learned from some smart managers was to say, they said that when we start with an innovation, first of all, we know exactly why we make the effort. So the reason is defined. It's almost like being a strategic instrument, something that we do because we have an ambition for something that we don't know how to do with what we're already doing. And second of all, we treat it as a learning opportunity. Because if you frame innovation process as a learning opportunity, you cannot fail because you definitely learn a lot of things. Because when your uncertainties and your assumptions and your theories of change meet reality, this is how they break down, and this is how you learn what's really going on. And you're replacing your assumptions with better assumptions, and over time, if you stick with it, you'll figure it out, how this might work and what the problem might really look like, and what resources you need to access and how to configure them. So I think this is the learning diagnostic, a smart learning diagnostic for social innovation processes, or for innovation processes in general. Also, for-profit companies use that. As you start out with your idea, uncertainties in several areas might be high, not equally high, but you might have some knowledge about certain things, but know very little about other things. One is kind of problem frame uncertainty. Do you understand the problem in the correct way? Right? Do you fully understand what inequality means in a rural village? Do you fully understand what homelessness in the streets of Copenhagen, what that really is? How much variance is that in the problem? Why are people thrown into homelessness, and so on, right? There's a lot of uncertainty. You also don't, and because of that, very often, you also don't know what an effective solution will look like. There is solution uncertainty that you need to explore, right? That's why we do prototyping and careful interventions to just learn what might work, what might not work. These things are coupled. Very often you understand the problem because you're introducing a solution that doesn't work, and that gives you some feedback that, wow, if that solution doesn't work, the problem actually is a different one, right? And therefore, they all hang together. Adoption uncertainty. Does anyone do communities actually like the solution that I'm building for them, or the innovation that I'm building for them? There's lots of, the organization in India that I showed you, Gram Vikas, they were building a dairy plant to improve to lower economic inequality. And once they built the dairy plant, funded by the Ford Foundation, because it was a programmatic priority for the Ford Foundation to build dairy plants in India for some reason, then they figured out that the communities don't consume dairy products. And then they had a dairy factory that no one wanted to use. It did work, right? But no one wanted to use it. A failed innovation, right? You can do your homework on these things and reduce the cost of the learning process. Because after the innovation process, you should have replaced uncertainties with knowledge, and now you need to decide, is this something that we can do? Is this something we want to do? Is this something we can scale? Or should we say, now that we know what it would take, this is not for us. We need to do something else and start again with another innovation. So there is never success at the end of the innovation process. There is just knowledge about what the problem really looks like, what an effective solution might look like, and if anyone wants that, and whether it might have negative consequences, whether this fits your identity, and whether you can manage the innovation process. These are all areas of uncertainties that you need to explore. People actually turn this into learning instruments. I need to look at the watch. I think I'm not even... How much time do I have?
Oh, you have half an hour.
And how much have I used already?
Oh, you have half an hour from now.
From now, half an hour, okay. Now, because I also want to get some discussion going, but I'm afraid I put together too many slides, doesn't that? Can I have the next one? So one framework that really helped me think much more systematically and operationally about innovation is to say, an innovation process creates important knowledge in 3 dimensions, what we call the what knowledge. What are the factors that create and sustain problems in this world, or the problems that we care about, right? This is one important area of knowledge that is being created as a part of the innovation process. It's the same in the for-profit world. You think that you're solving a consumer problem, but maybe as part of the innovation process, you figure out that the consumer actually has a very different problem, or that what you thought was the consumer problem, actually the problem is something totally else than what you have assumed. Right? Solution space. This is what we call how knowledge. How do you access, nurture, and configure various resources? Funding, people, technologies, relationships, trust, and so on, into an effective intervention or solution or business model or whatever. And then the why knowledge, this clarity about why we make the effort, why do we do this, what type of change in this world do we stand for as an organization. That is also something that you are constantly being challenged as part of innovations, because innovations lure you in a direction that may not be compatible with you. We also see this in the for-profit sector. Think about Apple now going into automotive manufacturing. Does that still fit their identity? It's a big question, a big uncertainty. And we have the same in the social sector organization. If you deeply understand the nature of the problems that you care about, if you're clear about what you're doing, so if your intrinsic motivation and your passion for this problem is strong and defines the identity of you and your organization, if you have nurtured resources and configured them into real competencies of addressing those problems, you cannot help but create impact. Because if you're motivated and you have the ambition and you have the competencies to create these problems, you cannot help but make an impact. Therefore we call this an impact creation logic, an architecture of an effective organization. The impact creation logic is the result of innovation processes, right? But the impact creation logic is also improved by fine-tuning, constantly playing around with your business model, not being satisfied by your level of performance, but kind of making things better in small steps. So the impact creation logic gets better over time, not just through innovation that creates it, but then also through what we call scaling, doing things better, improving what you have, hiring more people, making them work more productively, and so on and so on and so on. So this is kind of an important, I think if you want to play with it, I think it's a useful instrument for structuring your learning processes as you invest or as you manage innovation processes, right? Next slide, please. So doing something as simple as that, this is what, the other day Chinese students were giving me after a lecture, and they said, oh, we've just created this simple framework and we're going to use this for our next innovation process. It's not very sophisticated, but it kind of forces you to learn very systematically about your assumptions, about the things that you observe, and put it down in writing, because learning only takes place when you put things down in writing. That's the most important thing. It is, for me, the number one criteria by which I evaluate whether an organization really is a learning organization or they just talk about learning a lot. That's the difference. Couple of frameworks that came out of that and out of that research. A case study, one of the first case studies I've written, an organization called SECAM in Egypt. What they have sensitized me is, as part of the innovation process, we really also need to pay attention to balancing the technology side of innovation, the hardware, which is digital technology or any form of technology. Is about buildings and organizational structures. It's about money and funding. It's about trainings. I call all of that the hardware. But the most important thing is also the software. How do we build trusted relationships with communities or people or vulnerable people so that we can engage them in a process of rethinking possibilities in our lives, rethinking habits and traditions that are holding them back, all the things that I call the software. And out of that reflection, and again, I'm just throwing stuff at you, but it's all published, comes a framework that we also find very, very useful as a monitoring or a learning device as part of the problem dimension of the innovation process. We call this the mapping problem spaces tool, where we separate between technical problems which have economic and cognitive dimensions and relational problems which have normative and power and politics dimensions. And again, this is not a sophisticated framework, it's very simple, but if you take it serious and you really start categorizing your observations and your assumptions in these slots and have a discussion in your innovation team and with your funders about that, you can create much more clarity and much more make the innovation process and the learning process much more systematic. So what I want to say is that, yeah, innovation is kind of, it's a tough thing, but there are instruments here that might help you making it a little bit more effective and loading the dice in your favor. And that's one of the things we try to do in the book. Other things like the Aravind Eye Hospital in Bangladesh, the most effective eye hospital in the world. They treat 2/3 of their patients for free, but they make a 50% profit margin. When I saw this, I was still at the business school at that time. I said, yeah, there's something wrong with the data. But then the data were right, and we needed to understand how does that work, because if we understood how Aravind works, maybe other eye hospitals could be with like Aravind. And I'm not going to talk much about that. We had to develop whole new methods of how to map a business model or how to map a solution or an intervention, right? And again, this is published, so I'm not going to go into that, but I just want to share with you our source of inspiration and the type of work that we did from a research angle. You can do that. The paper is not hard to read. I do this in a workshop with my students. In 2 hours, they learn how to model an organization, and they are like 10 times more precise afterwards than just reading a case study or just listening to some presentation about how something works. So there are instruments available that help you and guide your efforts on innovation, both from the funding side, but particularly from the organization and implementation side. Next thing, let's come back to that here. Remember that this is the characteristic nature of innovation processes, exploring uncertainties and managing your emotional state, which has good and bad days. And therefore, one other framework that we use is a provocative one, to say that innovation itself does not create any impact. If you are successful, at the end you have a new process, a new service, a new business model, a new product, or whatever the outcome is, but you have only really invested in learning. You have sunk costs now at this point of time. And therefore, what you need to do is you need to think about the other side of the coin. Scaling is the thing that generates impact from the investment in innovation. And one of the pathologies that I see in many social innovation efforts is that scaling is a side node of the innovation process. We'll think about scaling later. And that's a big mistake, because if you don't build scalability into your design process of your innovation design, you may not be able to scale it. Even if the innovation works, you may not be able to scale it yourself, or others may not be able to adopt what you have produced because you've only designed it for yourself. So we got to bring the scaling conversation much earlier into the innovation design and not as a side note. Because if you don't know how to scale, don't bother about innovating, because you cannot create impact from your efforts, even if you succeed. And unfortunately, there's too many resources going into innovation and accelerators and labs, and too little going into helping people build effective organizations, manage resources, manage staff, manage operations, bring the ideas on the ground, make them into routine businesses, because routine business is the thing that creates impact, not innovation. You may get lucky with innovation from time to time, but you never get lucky with scaling. Scaling requires building deep competencies, and that takes time, focus, and a lot of passion, because otherwise you're jumping around from one project to the other. So understanding that innovation and scaling hand together and depend on each other, I think, is a simple framework, but one that I think is useful to keep that in mind. Right? So you cannot just invest in innovation. It makes no sense. And out of that comes one of our favorite, or let's say in practice, most successful frameworks, the mapping innovation pathologies framework. All the ways in which organizations, including funders and consultants and supporters, or your own organization, make the innovation process ineffective, never get started. You know, this pathology where sometimes there is an opportune moment where you cannot implement your ambitions with the business as usual. You need to do something new, you need to change something, you need to find a new way. But then there's like one discussion after the other and one meeting after the other, and then after 6 months you still haven't decided. And we see this a lot in organizations, a lot of talking about ideas, but well, we're not sure, maybe next year, and so on and so on. So kind of this never getting started pathology. which is also deadly because you need some level of innovation to keep your organization alive. An eye hospital like Aravind, which is so effective in doing mass cataract surgeries, the people burn out because they deliver a tremendous impact, but they do the same thing every day. This is why they're so good at it. But you need to give them opportunities to kind of nurture their sources of inspiration, their creativity, develop new skills. So I think from a hygiene perspective, we need to build in a minimal amount of innovation, and smart organizations use this to build their high potential pipelines. You know, let them try out an idea, give them some resources, let them fail and stand up and defend their idea, and let them learn from it. So never get started is a real pathology. Stop too early. You think that, for example, that the innovation process is as linear as project management likes it to be, or many foundations and the political sector often likes it to be. Show me the impact report in 6 months' time for an innovation process, right? And because the innovation process is non-linear, if you measure it after 6 months, you will say, oh no, this is obviously not working, which might be a false conclusion because you might be in the middle of an interesting learning journey that you should continue. But if you have the wrong mental model of an innovation process, you may just stop it. Or if the innovation process is not a strategic instrument, but just some playground for managers who aren't too busy right now, you may just withdraw them in the middle of an interesting innovation process for other more important and more urgent things. Right? Or stop too late. The foundation gave you a $2 million budget for your wonderful idea, and halfway through you figured out that it doesn't work, but the idea was created by the CEO or by the director of the company. No one wants to tell her or him, and so you keep going with your innovation and we see this a lot. And also because you cannot report failure to a foundation that gave you money. They all talk about risk and innovation, yeah, but failure, that's not possible. So I know a lot of instances where organizations have just used up their budgets and with very little impact. Insufficient scaling, we already talked about that. Too many bad ideas get pushed, you have no good criteria, you have no good learning processes. And innovate again too soon, because innovation is so sexy. We have all these NGOs that jump from one innovation grant to another innovation grant, never get good at anything, and just play around, but never really create much impact. So this we have turned into a workshop that I really encourage you to do. You can actually read it up. We've published it. It's freely available in Stanford Social Innovation Review. How to do that workshop in your organization is very healthy. If you do it well, the workshop is a really healthy starting ground to really make your innovation processes much more productive and effective. What else do I have here? You know, maybe let's open up a discussion and not go into so much detail anymore. Let's skip all of that. Yeah, we know that. Yeah, that maybe this thing here is an important one. The scaling, at any moment in time as an organization, you need to think about, do we allocate resources to innovation or to routine processes? Things that we're already doing well, right? The problem is that an innovation idea might be really full of uncertainties for an inexperienced organization or an organization that isn't really good at anything, because everything they do is full of uncertainties because they don't have the required knowledge, right? But the same idea for another more experienced organization, they may be totally set up to just implement that idea because they have relevant knowledge, they have relevant experience and competencies, they understand these problems already. So for you as a funder and a supporter, think about, if you care about idea creation for some social problem, what is the organization that has the best chance for whom this is not just an uncertain idea, but they have already relevant competence and relevant knowledge to implement it at much lower degrees of uncertainty. This is critical, and I think this is the last thing I just want to throw at you. I think there's nothing. No, we don't do that. No, go. Yeah, that's fine. Thank you. So, really just to whet your appetite, as I said, you know, maybe there's one interesting thing here that you want to know more about, and then I've succeeded.
So I presume that there are things that you want to know more about. So please give us all your questions, and I'll run around to the microphone.
Thank you, Christian, for a very nice presentation, and thank you for all your writings. I really like them. I'm a big fan of your articles and book. I'm from the public sector, and I'm a bit worried about innovation in the public sector because I think we are too good at scaling or too good at doing what we are paid to do, so to say. And all of the examples are either for the for-profit sector or from the social enterprises. Do you have any advice to me or to the public sector where to go to look for examples? Or, of course, we can transfer some of the models from the lean startup or we can transfer some of the model from your low-income or middle-income countries and more NGO perspectives.
Can I?
So,
yeah,
in
go ahead.
A society where we have a strong public sector with a lot of regulations and we have democracy and we need to deliver everything to everybody, and how can we innovate or learn and scale, and how do we organize it in a heavyweight version or lightweight version or a garage version? I know you cannot elaborate here, but maybe you can say, read this book, or I have a cousin who looks like me, but he works with public innovation.
So, thanks for that question, and allow me to, because I only have, maybe this 1 minute to influence your thinking, I want to be very provocative. The public sector does not have an innovation problem. The public sector has a routine problem. The public sector is not good at what they're already doing. And I see this everywhere in Europe, wasting a lot of abundant tax money for all kinds of fancy political projects with never any questions asked whether this is really working, who is accountable for it, how do we measure the impact. The public sector, like many other organizations also in the philanthropic and development sectors, they have what we call a green zone problem. They do not have deep knowledge around problems, no real competencies on solutions, and it's just not very effective and productive. So your problem is not on the innovation side. You need to build a green zone first and become effective at what you're doing, improve your processes, allocate resources more efficiently and more productively, make people accountable for when is the public sector ever learning something? Where is the learning report of the last $100 million Euro project that the public sector in Germany has implemented on green technologies? I never see it, right? So, gotta fix these pathologies first, and then you can think carefully about innovation, but you should not play around with innovation. You should play around with building a green zone. I think this is the thing that I again and again tell people from the public sector, you have a green zone problem, not an innovation problem. That's the thing. Just imagine if the resource allocation in the public sector, and I don't know Denmark, but I just observe it in Germany, the kinds of bizarre amounts of money we throw like a plaster on all projects. If we would only be 10% more effective in doing that, wow, how much impact we could create.
Hospital sector.
Sorry?
Hospital sector.
Hospital sector, or building airports in Germany, or whatever, energy sector. We are wasting tons of money with little to show for. If we are 10% more productive in what we're doing, we can go a long way, much more than you could ever achieve through innovation. Once you're there, you can think about innovation as a strategic instrument for certain occasions, but work on the green zone, not on the red zone. That would be my recommendation.
Anyone else who dares ask a question about public sector?
Sorry.
Or anything else? Can I see some hands? Yeah.
So I was just wondering, do you have an answer for this public resource allocation? Because how do we allocate our resources more efficiently? I know there's been some movement in the well-being economy sector. Is that something that you gravitate to, or do you have another enlightening answer for this particular problem?
No, I need to be honest. I'm not a public sector researcher. I don't have an empirical basis sufficiently to give you a smart answer. So what I'm sharing here is some intuition and observations, but they are more random and more personal observations. So I need to be really clear about that. I don't know how to fix the problem of the public sector. I really don't know. It seems as long as we prioritize party politics over long-term strategies for our countries. And I think Denmark has shown how this might work. Your strategy implementation of becoming fossil fuel free, working across the party system. That I think is a really good example, at least from my humble observation, of how this might work. But by and large, everyone's struggling with that, and I don't have a good answer, sorry. Yeah.
I think it's very inspiring that you are having so much emphasis on the organization and the healthy learning organizations. And today there's a lot of foundations here. Are they investing too little in building healthy organizations and too much in building new innovative interventions? My experience is that a lot of these very enthusiastic organizations, maybe they lack enough of their attention being drawn to just this being a good place to work, a place where we are feeling safe and we can learn from each other and stuff. Because we have to realize this thing we're doing.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah. No, thanks for sharing that. And my advice to funders, supporters, but also to young entrepreneurs, independent of what your passion is. So the most important asset you can have is your passion, because for some reason you care about the social problem so much that you want to make the effort. That's rare, actually. Most people working in the sector are professionals that have paid jobs. But the passion thing, right? And it doesn't grow on trees, unfortunately. But the passion isn't enough, because we have so many naive do-gooders who never get good at anything. The passion alone doesn't carry you. So my advice is always, don't follow your passion. Do something that is easy and learn how to do the easy thing well. And that may sometimes be join a company and work there as an intern or as a junior manager for a couple of years. Learn how to manage things. The founder of Aravind, he was an experienced eye doctor working in the public sector health hospital for all of his life before he started with the social innovation of Aravind. The founder of BRAC, the largest and most effective NGO in the world perhaps, he was a manager in the Shell company, right? He knew how to manage a big organization. How can we as society help inspired and passionate people build the elemental competencies and skills that they need to build and nurture effective organizations? I think we can do much more good things than just fueling innovation all the time. But that might also require that foundations and people with money and supporters change a little bit their attitude towards what is fundable and what kind of things do we fund in general. Yeah. Thanks for that.
And to stay on that track, how do we then maintain the passion and the purpose as the guiding star for the organizations? Because I think there's a tendency that organizations at some point look at themselves and act for their own benefit rather than for what their purpose was at the beginning.
Yeah. That's the ultimate leadership challenge in these organizations, right? If you have the wrong leader in your organization, there's little you can do. That's why, for some reason, if I think back at all the organizations that I've studied, that I think have become effective, the founders are still in place after 20 or 30 years. They're still there and holding up the candle and reminding everyone who we are and what the type of change is that we stand for. And it's amazing how they nurture the second and third generation of management, and they try to keep their people on board for long times, right? Because you need this group of senior leadership that has a consensus about who we are and reminds everyone all the time that this is why it's worthwhile to get up on Monday morning and give your best and work really, really hard. That needs to be actively nurtured. It cannot be a mission statement written on some paper on the wall, no. Thanks for that, yeah.
I think we have time for one more question. Peter.
I'll ask you a question because I might have to change my presentation later. No, I was wondering, I guess, two questions that are kind of on the same point. One is, if you went back to Carl Mikas and asked him to design for scale, would you be able to kind of do that? I don't really like the presentation of the journey, but I kind of wonder at that early stage of the movement, like, is that really what you think about? And it kind of links to my other point, which is I work for a foundation that's a kind of part think tank, part funder, and we spend a lot of time thinking about funding, such as scale and have massive impact. But there's a lot of amazing, smart, inspired people out there. When you present framework after framework for scale, impact, and question back to you is like, how do we make sure that we present all this knowledge in the right way so we don't kill passion and motivation? Because I think
No, you
there's a
shouldn't.
huge fine balance there. And, you know, I always think about like Greta Thunberg and like the fight for the future and like the massive impact that's having. And all the stuff that I've been saying about scale is completely wrong compared to what she's doing. And I don't even know how to square that, but it's something I think a lot about.
Yeah, it's a good question. It allows me to maybe make a final important statement. Don't get distracted by all this language and all these frameworks out there, including mine. They're like more frameworks than you can ever even read, right? And frameworks don't give you answers. Frameworks are just structures that help you have a communication about a shared communication with a team and capturing your thoughts in a systematic way. In the end, it doesn't really matter what frameworks you use. I mean, there's frameworks that are really not grounded in any theoretical or empirical evidence. I would avoid those. But it doesn't matter whether you use one of my frameworks or anyone else's frameworks, but stick with it. Own the framework, translate it, make it useful for you, and stick with it, and so that it becomes a natural thing for team discussions, that people understand this is the framework from which we look at our work and our questions. And don't get distracted by all these new frameworks coming out all the time. There's like 500 innovation books every year, and Carsten will produce some frameworks, but they're probably good ones at least. So, and the second thing I want to say is, and for that reason, don't hire people. Don't primarily, we had this discussion this morning, don't hire smart, experienced people if you really want to go somewhere with social innovation. Hire people who are passionate about what you're doing. If you're working on homelessness, hire people who are deeply passionate about homeless people and their fate. If we work on health, hire people who are deeply passionate about communities not having access to mental health services. Don't hire smart people, because smart people always need to prove how smart they are. They need to justify their salaries and positions. They are solutions oriented. They don't have the patience to learn and admit that they don't know, right? So hire the people who are really passionate and who are therefore also able to learn something and get better over time and build your team in that way. But so I'm gonna end here.
I think that's a good closing remark. Thank you very much, Captain.
Thank you.